Commander Hyunwoo pressed his clawed hands against the cold metal railing of his command bridge, watching the small blue planet grow steadily larger on the massive viewing screen. Behind him stretched the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. 10,000 warships of the Draconian Empire, their black hulls reflecting the distant yellow star's light like a swarm of deadly insects. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as dozens of reptilian officers worked at their stations, monitoring weapon systems and fleet formations. Hyunwoo's amber eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he surveyed his domain. This was the culmination of 3 years of planning, 6 months of travel, and centuries of draconian military tradition. The humans had made their choice, and it was the wrong one. 2 weeks ago, the Empire had sent its standard message to Earth through subspace relay. The terms were simple and generous, as always. Submit to draconian rule, provide tribute in resources and labor, accept imperial governors, and enjoy the protection of the galaxy's most powerful military force. It was an offer that 847 other worlds had accepted without question. But these, humans, were different. They had actually said no. Lieutenant Dong-hyun looked up from his communications console, his scaled face showing barely concealed excitement. "Commander, we're receiving another transmission from the planet's surface. It's from their so-called defense commander." Hyunwoo straightened his military uniform, adorned with the medals of 17 successful conquests. "Put her through. Let's see what these primitives have to say now that they can see the full might of our armada." The main screen flickered, and the image of the blue world was replaced by the face of a human female. Admiral Jin-A appeared calm, almost serene, despite the fact that she was facing the largest invasion force in galactic history. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore what looked like a basic military uniform. Behind her, Hyunwoo could see what appeared to be a primitive command center with blinking lights and crude displays. "Commander Hyunwoo of the Draconian Empire," Jin-A said, her voice steady and clear. "This is your final warning. Leave our system immediately, and no harm will come to your forces." The bridge fell silent. Several junior officers turned to stare at the screen in disbelief. Captain Yunji, Hyunwoo's second-in-command, let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the chamber. Hyunwoo himself was momentarily speechless. In all his years of military service across dozens of campaigns, he had never encountered such audacity. This human female was actually threatening him. Him, the conqueror of the Vegan colonies, the subduer of the crystal worlds, the commander of a fleet that could glass entire continents. "You dare threaten the Draconian Empire?" Hyunwoo's voice rose, his reptilian features twisting into an expression of amused contempt. "Your entire planet's defense consists of chemical fuel rockets and primitive metal aircraft. Our advanced scouts counted fewer than 3,000 of your crude fighters. We have brought 10,000 warships, each one capable of destroying your largest cities with a single plasma bombardment." He gestured broadly at the tactical displays, showing the massive fleet formation. "Your weapons cannot even penetrate our basic shielding. Your fastest ships move like crawling insects compared to our interceptors. Surrender now, human, and I promise your deaths will be quick and merciful." Ginny's expression didn't change. If anything, her smile grew slightly colder, like winter wind across frozen ground. "Commander, we have offered you a peaceful solution. Your ships can leave unharmed, and your empire need never know of this miscalculation." "Miscalculation?" Hyunwoo roared, spittle flying from his fanged mouth. Around the bridge, his officers shifted nervously. Their commander was known for his temper, but this level of rage was unusual even for him. "The only miscalculation here is yours, primitive. You should have accepted our generous terms. Instead, you choose extinction." Ginny nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. "Very well, Commander. We gave you every opportunity. When you're ready to begin your attack, please do so. Earth is waiting." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Hyunwoo stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his breathing heavy. No species had ever shown such disrespect to the Empire. It was unthinkable. "Sir," Captain Yunji approached cautiously. "Your orders?" Hyunwoo turned to face his tactical officer. "Signal the first wave. 500 ships, standard bombardment formation. I want those. Primitive cities burning within the hour. What about prisoners, sir? The usual labor conscription protocols. No prisoners. Hyunwoo's voice was ice-cold. This world has chosen to insult the Empire, make an example of them. Total extermination. As alarms began sounding throughout, the fleet and engines roared to life. Hyunwoo allowed himself a savage smile. The humans would learn what happened to those who defied the Draconian Empire. He had no idea that Earth had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Lieutenant Somin's claws clicked nervously against her console as she monitored the tactical display, watching 500 red dots representing Draconian fighters streak toward the blue planet below. This should have been routine, another quick planetary suppression, followed by orbital bombardment and swift surrender. She had witnessed this same pattern on dozens of worlds, but something felt different this time. First wave entering atmosphere, reported Sergeant Wu Jin from the sensor station. Human defensive fighters rising to intercept, counting approximately 200 craft. Commander Hyunwoo stood behind Somin's station, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. 200 against 500. These humans are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Somin studied her readings more closely. The human ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Instead of the crude angular design she expected from a primitive civilization, these craft moved with fluid grace, their hulls seeming to shimmer and bend light around them. They accelerated without visible engine flares, turned without apparent inertia limitations, and flew in perfect formations that suggested either advanced computer control or incredible pilot skill. "Sir, something's not right," Somin muttered, adjusting her sensors. "These human ships, they're not showing up properly on our targeting systems." "Explain that," Hyunwoo demanded, leaning over her shoulder. "The energy signatures are wrong. Our computers keep trying to lock onto them, but it's like they're not entirely there, and they're moving at speeds that should tear their pilots apart from the gravitational forces." On the main viewing screen, the first engagement began. Draconian. Fighters opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt through starship armor. Brilliant green bolts of superheated energy lanced toward the human interceptors, weapons that had never failed to destroy their targets. The human ships didn't dodge. They didn't need to. The plasma bolts simply passed through them harmlessly, as if firing at ghosts. "What in the name of the void?" Captain Yunji whispered from her position near the command chair. Then the human ships began to return fire. Instead of the primitive kinetic weapons or crude missiles the Draconians expected, pale beams of silver light emerged from the human craft. The beams moved slowly, almost lazily, drifting through space like glowing ribbons. They looked harmless, almost beautiful. When the first beam touched a Draconian fighter, the ship simply vanished, not exploded, not damaged, not disabled. It was there one moment and gone the next as if it had never existed at all. "Sir," Somin's voice cracked with panic. "Fighter Squadron 7 they're not on sensors anymore." Hyunwoo pushed past her to stare. At the tactical display, where dozens of red dots had been showing his attacking fighters, empty space now stared back. No debris fields, no distress beacons, no energy signatures indicating destroyed ships. Just nothing. "Malfunction," he growled. "Has to be a sensor malfunction." But even as he spoke, more red dots began disappearing from the display. The pale silver beams drifted through the battle space like slow-moving death, and every Draconian ship they touched simply ceased to exist. Lieutenant Donghyun's panicked voice came over the communication system. "Command, this is Fighter Group Delta. The humans are using some kind of weapon we've never seen. Ships are just vanishing, no explosions, no wreckage, The transmission cut to static mid-sentence. Somin watched in horror as another entire squadron winked out of existence on her display. "Commander, we've lost over 300 fighters in less than 10 minutes. Whatever those beams are, our shields can't stop them. Our armor can't absorb them. They just erase everything they touch." Captain Taeho's voice suddenly crackled over the long-range communications from the second attack wave. "Command, this is second wave leader. We're seeing some kind of static." Another communication cut off. Hyunwoo stared at the tactical display where another 100 red dots had simply vanished. In the space of 15 minutes, Nearly half of his first attack wave had been eliminated without inflicting a single confirmed kill on the human forces. This is impossible, he breathed. No primitive species has weapons like this. Engineer Kyung-soo looked up from his station, his reptilian face pale with fear. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildups across the planet's surface. Whatever they used on our fighters, it was just the beginning. On the main screen, the remaining Draconian fighters were retreating in full panic, breaking formation and fleeing back toward the safety of the main fleet. But the human interceptors followed them, those ghostly silver beams reaching out like the fingers of death itself. So-min counted the remaining red dots on her display. Of the 500 ships in the first wave, fewer than 50 were still transmitting identification signals. "Commander," she said quietly, "the humans aren't just defeating us. They're not destroying our ships the way normal weapons do. It's like they're unmaking them, erasing them from reality itself." Hyunwoo stared at the screen in stunned silence. In 3 centuries of Draconian military history, no enemy had ever inflicted such casualties so quickly. And they still had. No idea how the humans were doing it. The blue planet below continued to spin peacefully, as if nothing had happened at all. The surviving ships of the Draconian Armada hung in the cold darkness of space, their formations scattered and broken. Commander Hyunwoo paced the bridge of his flagship like a caged predator, his scaled hands trembling with barely contained rage, and something he had never experienced before in his military career: genuine fear. "Communications," he barked at Lieutenant Minho, who was frantically working at his console. "I want a direct channel to High Command immediately." Minho's claws danced across the control surfaces, but his expression grew more frustrated with each passing second. "Sir, I'm trying every frequency, every relay station, every emergency channel. The signals just stop at the edge of this solar system. It's like hitting a solid wall." "That's impossible," Captain Yoonji said from her position near the tactical displays. "Subspace communications don't work that way. There's no known technology that can block transmissions across an entire star system." Hyunwoo slammed his fist against the nearest console, leaving dents in the metal. "I don't care what's possible. We just lost nearly 800 ships to weapons that shouldn't exist. Get me through to the Empire." Engineer Kyung-soo looked up from his sensor station, his voice quiet but urgent. "Commander, I've been analyzing the interference patterns. This isn't natural. Someone is actively jamming all our long-range communications using technology I can't even begin to understand." "The humans," Hyunwoo growled. "Those primitive savages somehow have jamming technology." "Sir," Lieutenant So-min interrupted, her voice tight with tension. "The humans are broadcasting again. Admiral Jin-ae is requesting communication." Hyunwoo wanted to refuse, to turn away from this human who had humiliated his mighty fleet. But he needed answers. He needed to understand what had happened to his ships. "Put her through," he said through gritted teeth. The main screen flickered to life, but this time the image that appeared made every officer on the bridge fall silent in shock. Admiral Jin-ae stood in what was clearly a command center, but it bore no resemblance to the primitive facility they had seen during their first communication. The room behind her was vast, its walls covered with displays showing 3-dimensional star maps, energy readings and tactical information that seemed to float in the air like holograms. Strange crystalline structures pulsed with blue light, and machinery hummed with power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Everything was sleek, advanced, and completely beyond anything in Draconian technology databases. "Commander Hyunwoo," Jin-ae said, her voice calm and measured, "you're wondering why you can't contact your empire." Hyunwoo found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. What have you done?" Jin-ae gestured to one of the floating displays behind her, which showed a 3-dimensional map of the entire solar system. A shimmering field of energy surrounded it like a soap bubble, pulsing with gentle light. "This system has been isolated," she explained. "Your Empire's tracking systems still show your fleet in transit to Earth. As far as they know, you're still 3 days away from arrival. They'll never know what happened here unless we choose to tell them." Lieutenant So-min's hands flew over her sensor controls, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy signatures across the planet's surface. Installations that weren't there before are powering up." On the tactical display, Earth's surface began to light up like a festival celebration. Massive structures were rising from what had appeared to be normal continents and oceans. Cities that had looked like primitive settlements were revealing themselves as gleaming technological centers. Mountain ranges opened like flowers, exposing complex installations filled with equipment that pulsed with the same silver energy they had seen in those devastating beams. "This is impossible," Captain Yunji breathed. "Our advanced scouts surveyed this planet for months. These installations, they weren't there." Jinei's smile was patient, almost pitying. "Your scouts saw exactly what we wanted them to see. Earth has technologies your species hasn't even dreamed of yet." Hyunwoo watched in growing horror as more and more of Earth's true nature revealed itself. Orbital platforms began decloaking around the planet, massive ring-shaped structures that dwarfed even the largest Draconian space stations. The energy readings coming from the planet's surface were now so intense that they were overloading his ship's sensors. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Jinei turned to face him directly, and for the first time, Hyunwoo saw something ancient in her eyes, something that spoke of knowledge and experience far beyond what any single lifetime should contain. "The question isn't what we are, Commander," she said quietly. "The question is what you choose to be." Behind her, the command center continued to bustle with activity, as human technicians worked at controls that seemed to respond to their thoughts, rather than their touch. Data streams flowed through the air like living things, and the very walls seemed to pulse with contained power. "Your fleet came here expecting to conquer a defenseless world," Jinei continued. "Instead, you've discovered something your empire was never meant to find. Now you must decide what to do with that knowledge." The transmission held steady, crystal clear despite the interference that was blocking all other communications. Hyunwoo realized with growing dread that the humans weren't just jamming his signals by accident. They were choosing exactly what he could and couldn't communicate, controlling his connection to the galaxy with casual ease. Earth wasn't a primitive world that had gotten lucky. It was a fortress that had been pretending to be defenseless, waiting for someone to test its patience. And the Draconian Empire had failed that test completely. Engineer Kyung-soo hunched over his console in the depths of the flagship's communications. "Bay," his reptilian eyes straining to decode the strange signals flowing through space around them. For the past hour, he had been picking up scattered transmissions from the human ships, fragments of conversations that his translation software was slowly piecing together. What he discovered made his blood run cold. "Test Protocol Omega is now active," came one transmission. "Subject species 1247 has initiated hostile contact as predicted." Another voice responded, "Confirmed. The Draconian Empire follows the same pattern as the previous 1246 species we've evaluated. Aggression first, diplomacy never." Kyung-soo's claws trembled as he adjusted the receivers, trying to capture more of these impossible conversations. The humans were talking about his people like laboratory specimens, like insects under a microscope. "Commander," he called out, his voice cracking with panic, "you need to hear this immediately." Hyunwoo stormed into the communications bay, his patience already worn thin by the disasters of the day. "What is it now, engineer?" Kyung-soo's hands shook as he played back the recorded transmissions. "Sir, I've been intercepting human communications. They're not what we thought they were." The bridge crew gathered around as more fragments played through the speakers. Human voices discussed monitoring protocols and species, development tracking, and something called Galactic Seeding Project Phase 7. "According to these signals," Kyung-soo continued, his voice barely steady, "the humans aren't originally from Earth. They're calling themselves descendants of something called the First Wanderers, a species that apparently seeded the galaxy with life millions of years ago." Captain Yunji leaned forward, her scaled face pale. "That's impossible. Our archaeologists have studied galactic development for centuries. There's no evidence of any ancient seeding civilization." "There is now," Kyung-soo whispered, pulling up more data on his screens. "Look at this transmission log. They're discussing monitoring station Terra 3 and subject species evaluation protocols. Earth isn't their homeworld, Commander. It's a watching post." Hyun-woo felt the deck seem to shift beneath his feet as the implications hit him. They've been watching us. All this time, they've been watching every species in the galaxy. Not just watching, Lieutenant So-min said. From her position at the tactical station, testing us. Every species that develops space travel eventually encounters them, and they judge whether we're worthy of continuing to exist. The silence on the bridge was deafening. Outside the viewports, Earth continued to spin peacefully, but now it looked different to the Draconian officers. Not a world to be conquered, but a trap they had walked into willingly. "Sir," Communications Officer Minho called out urgently, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. Something big is happening." As if summoned by their growing understanding, the space around the Draconian fleet began to shimmer and distort, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The stars themselves seemed to bend and twist as reality rippled around them. Then the ships appeared. Massive vessels decloaked from the void, their hulls emerging from what had seemed like empty space. Each one was larger than the greatest Draconian dreadnought, their designs completely alien yet somehow beautiful. Instead of the angular, aggressive lines of military vessels, these ships flowed like living things, their surfaces seeming to shift and pulse with inner light. "By the void!" Captain Taeho's panicked voice crackled over the communications from one of the remaining destroyers. "Sir, there are hundreds of them. They were here all along, just watching us destroy ourselves." Lieutenant So-min's voice was barely a whisper as she stared at her tactical displays. "Commander, I'm counting over 300 vessels. Each one is showing energy readings that are impossible. They're generating more power than our entire fleet combined." The human ships hung in space like sleeping giants, their presence filling the void with a sense of ancient power and patient wisdom. They hadn't been built for war. They had been built for something far more important. They were the guardians of the galaxy, the watchers who decided which species deserved to continue their journey among the stars. Admiral Jin A's voice suddenly echoed across all frequencies, transmitted simultaneously to every ship in the Draconian fleet. But now her words carried the weight of authority that spanned millions of years. "The Draconian Empire was given a choice," she said, her tone calm but filled with absolute finality. "Diplomacy or conquest, peace or war, growth or destruction. You chose conquest. You chose war. You chose to be destroyers rather than builders." Commander Hyun-woo sank into his command chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had stumbled into. His mighty armada, the pride of the Draconian Empire, was nothing more than a collection of toys in the presence of these ancient guardians. "Now you face judgment," Ginny continued, "not from a primitive species defending their world, but from the civilization that gave birth to all life in this galaxy. We are your ancestors, your creators, your judges, and you have disappointed us greatly." Engineer Kyung-soo looked up from his console, his voice filled with awe and terror. "Commander, according to these readings, humanity has been guiding galactic development for over 3 million years. Every species, every world, every civilization, we're all part of their experiment." The truth was overwhelming. The Draconians weren't conquerors exploring an empty galaxy. They were children who had forgotten their parents, and now those parents had returned to see what their children had become. The answer was clearly not what humanity had hoped for. Commander Hyun-woo stood in the center of his command bridge, surrounded by the silent forms of his officers. The great warship that had once been the pride of the Draconian fleet now felt like a tomb, its crew paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of the human vessels that encircled them like patient predators. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and then Admiral Jin-A appeared before him, not on a screen, not as a transmission, but as a perfect three-dimensional image that stood on his own bridge as if she were physically present. The hologram was so detailed that Hyun-woo could see the individual threads in her uniform, the slight movement of her breathing, even the way light reflected in her dark eyes. "Your armada came here to enslave a world you believed defenseless," she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent bridge. "In doing so, you revealed the true nature of your empire. The question now is whether that nature can change." Hyun-woo felt his legs trembling beneath him. This human woman, who hours ago he had dismissed as a primitive savage, now stood before him wielding technology that made his greatest weapons look like stone clubs. Around him, his crew remained frozen in shock and terror. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. Jinae's expression softened slightly, showing something that might have been pity. "Nothing from you, Commander, but we offer something to you. Your empire can continue its path of conquest and face complete isolation from galactic civilization, or it can accept guidance toward something better." Lieutenant So-Min looked up from her tactical console, her scaled face showing confusion, rather than fear. "Sir, the human ships, they're powering down their weapons, all of them." It was true. The massive vessels surrounding the Draconian fleet were reducing their energy signatures, their weapon systems going dark one by one. But somehow, this made them seem even more dangerous. They were so confident in their superiority that they didn't even need to keep their guns pointed at their enemies. "You're not going to destroy us?" Captain Yunji asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Jinny turned to face her, the hologram moving with perfect fluidity. "Destruction teaches nothing. Death ends the possibility of growth. We are offering you something far more valuable than your lives. We are offering you the chance to become better than what you are." Engineer Kyung-soo spoke up from his station, his voice shaking. "The communications blackout, how long will it last?" "As long as necessary," Jinny replied. "The galaxy will never know what happened here. Your empire's records will show only that the Grand Armada vanished near a primitive world called Earth. Your government will assume you were destroyed by some unknown weapon or cosmic phenomenon." Hyunwoo felt a chill run through his scaled body. "Our families, our people will think we're dead." "Unless you choose otherwise," Jin-ae said firmly. "Return to your empire. Tell them you encountered a species that offered alliance instead of conquest. Tell them you discovered that there are other ways to expand among the stars besides violence and domination." She gestured, and the hologram expanded to show images of other worlds, other species, all living in apparent harmony. Cities that gleamed with peaceful prosperity, trade routes that carried goods instead of weapons, worlds where different species worked together instead of conquering each other. "This is what we offer," Jin-ae continued, "not just to your empire, but to every species that chooses growth over destruction. Guidance, knowledge, technologies that can heal worlds instead of burning them." Communications Officer Minho looked up from his console. "Ma'am, if we agree to this, how do we know you won't simply destroy us later?" Jin-ae's smile was sad but genuine. "We have been watching your species for 3,000 years, waiting for you to make this choice. If we wanted you destroyed, you would have been gone long before you ever reached the stars." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had been watching the Draconians since before they had developed spaceflight, observing their choices, waiting to see what kind of species they would become. "What happens if we refuse?" Hyunwoo asked quietly. "Then you return to your empire unchanged," Jin-ae replied. "And slowly over the course of decades you will find that other species no longer respond to your communications. Trade routes will close, diplomatic channels will go silent. Your empire will become increasingly isolated until you are alone among the stars." Lieutenant So-Min understood first. "You'll cut us off from galactic civilization, not through war, but through abandonment." "Every species in the galaxy will eventually face this same choice," Jinny explained. "Those who choose cooperation and growth will join the greater galactic community. Those who choose conquest and domination will find themselves left behind." The months that followed were unlike anything in Draconian history. Commander Hyunwoo returned to the Empire capital with a story that shook the government to its core. A species that could have destroyed them, but chose instead to offer partnership. Technologies that could transform Draconian society, but only if they abandoned their aggressive ways. The debates raged for weeks. Military leaders demanded immediate retaliation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The humans possessed power beyond imagination, and they were offering to share it freely. The Draconian Empire's announcement shocked the galaxy. An end to all military expansion, the establishment of peaceful diplomatic relations with neighboring species, the conversion of warships into exploration and research vessels. Commander Hyun-woo, now bearing the title of Cultural Exchange Director, worked alongside human observers who arrived quietly and without fanfare. They taught new technologies, new ways of thinking, new possibilities for what the Draconian Empire could become. The official records showed nothing unusual. The Grand Armada had simply vanished near an unremarkable blue world called Earth. Most galactic historians assumed they had encountered some kind of spatial anomaly or unknown weapon. But throughout the galaxy, other species began to notice subtle changes. The Draconians, once feared as ruthless conquerors, were now offering trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Their warships had been replaced by science vessels and hospital ships, and in the depths of space, other monitoring stations continued their ancient vigil. Worlds that looked primitive and defenseless, but carried technology beyond imagination. Humans who had never forgotten their role as the galaxy's guardians, watching and waiting to see which species would choose wisdom over conquest when their time of testing came. The galaxy was vast, and there were still many species who had yet to make their choice.